Hello everyone. In this video we're going to be taking on a very special project, and we're going to be doing a restoration on this beautiful clock which was manufactured by the Ingraham company out of Bristol, Connecticut. That company was in business from about 1831 to around 1967, so that's 135 years, and they were a prolific producer of American clocks. Anyways, this clock is special to our family because our family has had it since World War II, since just after the war. Anyways, the history of the clock is as follows. During Hurricane Ian, in which my wife and I lost our house, a lot of people who live in this area had significant damage, including my father. And this house was hanging in my father's living room, and during that storm, my father had a 4x8 sheet of drywall come down from his ceiling, and on top of the drywall there's all the fiberglass insulation and everything that's, up in the rafters. And when that drywall came down, it took the clock with it, and the clock smashed onto the floor. Okay? The only upside to that was that the drywall and the insulation provided a little bit of a shock absorber to the clock. And miraculously, even though the case of the clock is shattered, the glass somehow did not break. That's the original glass from the clock. And it's amazing because that clock was pretty high up the way my father had it mounted. And that thing hit a ceramic floor with the sheet of drywall, pushing it down, and somehow managed to flip on top of the drywall in such a way that the drywall actually cushioned its fall enough to prevent breakage of the glass. So that really is something. So we can pretty much trace the history of this clock back to the time when the clock was brand new. This clock was built in 1934, and we know that because there's a month and a date stamped on the mechanism in front. Anyways, my great-grandfather was friends with a gentleman who purchased a house in Chicago in the Bucktown area on West St. Paul Avenue, if you're from the city. This guy purchased the house in 1934, same as when the clock was built. Obviously the clock was new at that time. Anyways, this guy never had any kids or anything like that, and when he died just after World War II, he gave the house to my great-grandfather. And so my great-grandfather and my great-grandmother lived in the bottom of the apartment of the house, and my grandparents and my dad and aunt lived in the upstairs apartment, and the clock was already in there. Anyways, as a kid, my dad always enjoyed the clock, winding it and the mechanical nature of it and things like that. And when my great-grandfather passed away in 1958, my great-grandmother gave my father the clock. So working on this clock is going to be a delicate operation. Okay, first of all, like a lot of projects that have an heirloom type thing attached to them, there's a lot of pressure on you because you don't want to be the thing's been in the family for a long time. I don't want to be the guy to screw it up. Okay, but as I mentioned before in my other videos, I am a tinkerer. Okay, and I'm not the type of person who brings something into a shop to get it repaired. That's just not my style. Anyways, we're gonna take our time in this clock. Okay, I really have no idea how it works. We're going to try to get it put back together, cleaned up, and functioning. There is a lot of damage. The case is completely broken apart. I'm not sure where we're at on the mechanism because I don't know how it operates, but we'll figure it out when we get to it. And there's a bunch of plaster on the clock. When that sheet of drywall came down, don't forget everything was completely soaking wet. And so that plaster was soft, and when it collided with the clock, it left a bunch of dried plaster on the clock, so we're going to have to carefully remove all of that without damaging the finish on the clock. So anyways, this project is different than the topics we normally cover on the channel, but I think it's interesting, and for me personally, this is a very special project because the clock has been in our family, for so many years, and I think that you're going to enjoy following along on this one. So let's get started. So that house where the clock was for all those years did not have a fireplace. And my grandfather, who I've spoken of many times in other videos, who was a woodworker, okay, he made up this little shelving unit to hang the clock on the wall. You can see he cut all those ornate details out there on the scroll saw. So anyways, like most of his projects, my grandfather did a nice job on that, and that unit has not suffered any damage. So we'll just clean it up and that should be good to go. Alright, so we're going to start by taking off this door. It looks like this gilded design is painted from the reverse of the glass, so when we clean that, we're going to be careful not to rub that off there. So it is an absolute miracle this glass did not break. It looks like we're missing a couple screws on that one hinge. Take these out, put this glass in a safe area. Like that. Isn't that beautiful? Okay, so this whole frame here is completely broken apart. So I think we'll just be able to kind of pull this apart. I want to take this mechanism off here. I could see 2 screws securing it here and here, but it looks like the top 2 screws are missing. So this part I think we could just remove because this is all broken here. Just like that. Okay, put that on the side. And now the actual mechanism is only secured with these 2 screws here. And then of course you got your chime, which is secured right there. Alright, so we got the movement detached. That was just held on with 2 screws. We got the chime detached. That was just held on with that 1 bolt. Took the little hook off of there. Any nails that were poking out, I took those out. And the original tag is still on the back of the clock, though it's really hard to read because it's so dark. But I was able to make out the words Lakeline. So when I Googled that, I saw that this company produced a whole series of clocks that they referred to as the Lakeline. And I don't know which model this is exactly because I can't read the tag. But we do know it's from the Lakeline series of clocks. Okay, so I'm going to hazard to guess that this clock was assembled with hide glue, which was a common glue, from those eras for fine furniture and things like that. So now what I'm going to do is start removing all these nails that are sticking out of the frame, because this whole thing's going to have to be glued and clamped back up. So we're going to take all these nails that are protruding out and remove them. This will be a little tedious operation pulling all these nails out of here, so I'll just do that and I'll bring you guys back. So we're pretty much taking this frame almost completely apart. It's a very tedious job, and like so many projects, pulling nails out isn't the hard part. Pulling nails out without doing any damage to the material around it, that makes it a lot more challenging. Because almost every piece here has some cracks and damage to it from the fall. So I'm just going to take the frame completely apart and we will clamp and repair and then glue everything back together as need be. We've got just about every nail out of this thing, and we have the case completely broken apart as far as we're going to take it. The only thing that I didn't tinker with was the door with the glass, because that glass is so delicate and we don't want to take a chance on breaking that. The risk is not worth the reward, and that frame seems to be pretty solid, so we'll just work around that and just leave it right in the frame. And then here you could see almost every piece of wood on the case is cracked or broken in some place. So they're all going to have to be glued and clamped, and it's just easier to do everything when it's separated. Additionally, because of the extensive damage to that, we won't have no choice but to give this at least one coat of shellac when we're done with it. It's just too much damage, so there's going to be no way around that. And in some areas where we're going to have to fabricate some trim pieces and stain that, it is what it is. And over here, here's all the nails I pulled out. It's weird because there's a variety of different size nails in there. I mean, like this one in particular. Look how long that is and compared to all the other ones. So I guess they just used whatever they had on hand. And those all look like they were original. It wasn't like they were replaced. And here's the pendulum and the hands of the clock and the key. Looks like that key is a replacement, but my dad said it's been in there as long as he could remember. Anyways, we're going to get started with the gluing and clamping of the wooden pieces. First step is giving all the parts a basic cleaning. Of course, this clock came from an era when a lot of people smoked in the house, and we had family members who smoked as well. So just cleaning off the grime. I'm cleaning off that plaster wherever possible. In this bucket, I got a solution of hot water and Dawn dish soap. And then I have a little simple green. These cleaners are fairly innocuous. They're not going to do a lot of damage to the shellac or anything like that. And then I have a little awl here for any of the plaster that I have to pick off of there. Like a archaeologist, we're hitting it with the awl. So I'm going to go ahead and get all these pieces cleaned up in the same fashion. Alright, so cleaning this glass is a little bit of a challenge because it's painted on one side, and then of course you look at the reverse of the glass on the other side. So there's no way that I would feel comfortable putting any kind of a chemical on this painted surface, but unfortunately it is kind of spotty in there just from over the years. So what I'm doing is I'm taking a time-consuming approach, and I'm taking a Q-tip, and I got a little bit of Windex right here, and I'm carefully going in between the details but not touching the details, and we're just going to do it the best we can using that approach. Okay, as you can see, that glass came out looking beautiful, and the way that I did it was after I used the Q-tip in between the gold leaf paint, then what I did was I used one of these microfiber cloths that comes with many pairs of sunglasses and things like that, because that could be used dry. So I had it 75% of the way clean with the Q-tip, and then I went and I just gave it a real light pass with the microfiber cloth, just used that completely dry, and that worked really good. That glass came out looking great. We have our first series of gluing and clamping underway. There was quite a few boards that were split and broken. There's a little trim piece there. This one actually had a number of broken pieces on it. One thing that you may notice is, for example, this board right here, there's like a little arithmetic problem on the bottom of that somebody wrote on there with a pencil. I'm not sure what that was for. Anyways, I am not going to sand down these pieces or anything like that. Some of these you could see where there's some dirt, things like that. I'm absolutely not trying to remove any of the history of the clock. We're just trying to fix what needs to be fixed and do a minimally invasive approach. So hopefully when we're done with this, it's not going to look dramatically different than it did right before the hurricane. Trying to salvage as much as possible what's left of this tag. The tag is completely falling off of here. I mean, if you blow on it, the pieces will fly off of there. So what I ended up doing was I got a piece of feeler gauge right here, a piece of shim stock. This is 2/1000 of an inch thick, and I took a little bit of glue and I gently worked it underneath the parts that are lifting. I mean, a lot of these are starting to come off, but you can't get the shim stock underneath there without tearing the whole thing apart. So the pieces that were peeling off badly, I got underneath there, put a little glue underneath there. I'll let that dry, and then I'm just going to hit it with a little clear coat,
and hopefully the clear coat will solidify the rest of it. It's not going to be perfect. You can't read it anyway. I'm just trying to keep the clock intact as much as possible. So you just have to make a compromise on that, and we'll just have to live with it. Okay, I made up a little gluing fixture for this triangular shaped piece. What's going to happen is I'm going to put this in here. I'm going to glue it, let it dry, and then after it's dry, this also had some nails in there. So I'm going to use one of these wire drill bits here you see in the index, and I'm going to use those to remount the nail holes. And then when I reinsert the nails, I'm going to put a dab of glue on them and reinsert them in there, because the holes are probably wallowed out after all these years. Plus I removed the nails, but I don't really want to go to a larger size. So that's the way we're going to get around that. Now I'm just going to put another weight where I have my fingers here. We'll call that good. So I'm turning down a piece of oak to about 5/8 of an inch in diameter, and I'm going to cut that into 4 pieces to make a small piece of 1/4 round that I need to use to replace this piece that's missing. I don't have that chunk of material. So I'll use my chisels, I'll clean that area up there, and then we'll glue that one in place and just kind of massage it with a piece of sandpaper until it blends in. That'll get us close right there. Alright, here's our 1/4 round that we turned. I got one of the pieces glued up over here on the molding. Fits real good. I'll fine tune it once that glue dries. And we'll just cut our angle and stain it up to blend it in. Even though we're not going to refinish the entire clock, some touching up of areas that were particularly damaged is going to be inevitable. So I'm using this gel stain right here. It's an aged oak color. And for example, this board had at least 5 different cracks in it that were glued and clamped. And the lines where the glue squeezed out, you could see those a little bit, so they're going to have to be touched up. So I put a kind of a heavy coat on there, let it dry a little bit, wipe it off, and then if any areas need to be blended in, I could apply a second coat of that and just touch it up cosmetically as needed. So I'm working on blending in this piece that we turned on the lathe to replace that piece of molding that was missing on there. I got it glued in. I'm just kind of massaging it, blend in with the other one. Then we'll have to stain it, of course. We're going to try to clean and lubricate the movement as much as possible without taking the whole thing apart. Obviously that'd be a delicate little job. Most of these areas where you see these, like these little bushings, okay, they feel pretty tight in there. And even though this is a mechanical clock, the reality is that it's probably spent 95% of its life not running, more for looks. So anyways, these parts look to be in pretty good condition. I don't see anything major. But one thing that I do know is important is to make sure that these springs are clean. So I'm going to try to let those out as much as possible within the confines of keeping the thing together and get in there and clean them.
I did look online at a couple clock forums, and some folks on the forum recommended using this Slick 50 product, which I have. So I'm going to use that just to clean and lubricate the mainsprings. And then as far as the rest of it is concerned, we're just going to give it a bath with some Simple Green or something like that, something gentle that's not going to take the lacquer off the brass pieces. Clean it as good as we can, and then we'll go ahead. And I did buy also some genuine clock oil made by this company called WWII. This is a synthetic clock oil. It's supposed to be a good brand, and then we'll lubricate all those pivot points as necessary, and we're going to call that good. I got the first spring let down, no problem. Pretty simple, really. There's a little pawl right here that catches on that gear, and that's what holds it under tension. So let me set up the camera here, and I'll show you how I took it down. So the first thing I thought of when I took a look at the mechanism that holds that spring into place is, oh man, I should use my Starrett hand vise on that, because if you look at the vise, it has a notch on one side which will perfectly grip on that square piece. This is a Starrett 86B hand vise. And these things have become pretty collectible, but they're useful for a lot of different things. It's probably why people are starting to collect them. Anyways, I just got that on the square. Got that on there nice and tight. Just gonna check it with my flashlight here. Make sure it's in there good, which it is. It's engaged in the notch. Now let me make sure that's tight. It is. Now what I did was I just used a little piece of tape so that the knob on this handle doesn't slide down and impede the movement of the vise as we twist it around to let the spring out. So now that little pawl that's holding that gear in place, I'm going to use my little hook here. Whoop, get into the camera so you can see it. Once I move that pawl off the gear, that thing's going to want to unravel. So the purpose of this hand vise is just to hold it and unravel it in a controlled fashion. So I'm going to first, let's see, I need to take it this way. Okay, now the pawl is open. Okay, and now that that's open, just let this down nice and easy. Man, that works like a charm. It's not very difficult. Just got to maintain a hold of the vise. Otherwise, I can see where you pinch your finger or something in there. You won't want to do that. Let it out a little bit more. Once it gets let out a little bit, then I use the hook and I just start pulling it out a little bit on my side. And that's so I can clean it. See how easy that is? Not very difficult at all. That's it, just like that. Easy as can be. Once it stops spinning, that's it. Call that good. I was debating on whether or not to use the ultrasonic cleaner to clean that movement, but I decided against it. I ended up setting this little contraption up right here. So this is filled up with purple power, which I'm just going to use for a short time on there because that purple power is actually pretty strong. I got a little submersible pump in there, okay? And when I turn this on, what will happen is it just recirculates like that, okay? Now I can just kind of brush to pieces. I could just have this recirculating in there, clean off all the heavy grease and things like that. And then I'm going to get it out of there. So that's my own little invention. It should work pretty good just for removing the heavy deposits. And we'll make sure it gets dried thoroughly. After a quick flush with the purple power to remove any heavy grease, then I immediately flushed it out with mineral spirits. 1, to remove any remaining grease, and 2, to flush out all that purple power. I don't want to leave it in that purple solution too long because I don't want to take the lacquer off the brass. And then I got in here and I thoroughly cleaned these mainsprings. I'm not an expert on clocks, but they look pretty clean to me. I got in there with a Q-tip and got them all cleaned up, and then I used the Q-tip to apply that spray 1 as much as possible. And so they look clean, they're lubricated. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that clock oil and I'm going to lubricate the pivot points, I believe they're called, And I know that you just need a drop of that oil on there. You don't need to over oil it. So I'll do that, and then we'll wind these springs back up, and I'll put this movement on the side until we get the case put back together. The movement seems to be running good after we lubricated and cleaned it, so we'll keep that on the side until we have the rest of the case finished. So I had to give the wooden pieces one light coat of shellac, really just to even out the finish, because where we glued up those pieces and replaced the little chunk of trim that was missing, you know, the finish, the shine was uneven. So I gave everything one light coat, and then I'm going to come in here with a piece of 4/0 steel wool, and I'm just going to knock the excess shine off of that. We don't want it to be too shiny. But they came out looking real nice. I'm having to replace a bunch of the nails that were in here. And these new ones that I have, as you can see there, they're about 59 thousandths of an inch thick. So I got this little Yankee drill here, and in there I have a number 54 drill bit, which is about 55 thousandths of an inch thick. And that'll give us 4 thousandths interference fit. And for wood, which compresses easier than metal does, that should be fine right there. So I'm pre-drilling those holes and then tapping those in. So I ended up mounting that movement inside the case using 4 bolts with nuts. You can see the brass nut right there. It was interesting because what they used originally was these wood screws, right? These wood screws were just screwed into that thin piece of plywood in the back holding the movement on, and then they just nipped them off. I mean, I guess I can't really argue with the technique that's held this clock together for almost 100 years, but trying to put these back in there in those holes would be an effort and futility, so I just bolted it in there. Now it's never going to come off of there. I went on eBay, and for next to nothing I bought a clock identical to the one we're working on. Ingraham was around for a long time. They made a lot of clocks. These clocks are plentiful and they're cheap. Our clock is special to us because of the family history, but it doesn't have a lot of value associated to it, especially now with the damage. Anyways, the reason why I bought this clock was this clock is running. It's in great condition. As you can see, it just has one broken piece of wood, but nothing major. I'm going to take the movement out of this clock and just lubricate it, and I'm going to use it in the garage as a clock. Okay, but now I have an identical clock that I could pull parts from in the future. If anything goes wrong with our primary clock, I have this clock here that I could pull parts from it. It's a lot cheaper to do that than it is to buy a piece online here and there. Or for example, this glass, you may not find the exact same one. Anything like that. If the movement goes bad on the other one, I can just swap it out with this one. So I'll keep this in the garage. And for right now, what I'm going to do is I am missing a few screws on the other one. I did buy some new screws. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the screws off of this one and use it on our primary clock, because these screws are the antique screws. Try to keep that one looking as original as possible. And then our replacement screws, I'll chemically weather those, put them back on here, and that should work out fine. So these screws in the top hinge came off of our donor clock.
Okay, that hole is stripped. So I'm gonna take a little wood glue, break off a piece of a toothpick, put it in there, then we'll reinsert that screw. I'll just do that off camera. That hour hand is just pressed onto the shaft, and the minute hand locks in place with a little dog that's machined into that. And then there's just a little nut that holds this in place. Fine tune the time once we get it running. Well, I hope that you enjoyed following along on this video. This was a fun project, and this clock is special to us because it's been in the family for a long time. You know, that piece that my grandfather built really accentuates the clock. He had a great sense of proportion when he built stuff, and he was able to build things that were light and strong, and he never built things that were heavy and clunky. And if you didn't know that that piece was built after the fact, you know, it looks like it came from the factory like that. So anyways, you know, I probably won't run this clock every day, maybe on holidays or something like that. But it's nice to know that it is running and it looks great, and we hope that it stays in the family for a long time to come. Anyways, thank you very much for watching this video. We'll see you in the next one. Take care.